You know how life sometimes feels perfect, almost too perfect. Like nothing could possibly disturb your peace? That was me, living in my quiet little forest cabin. I had chosen this life on purpose. Away from the city, away from the noise, away from people who thought rules were more important than freedom. Out here, my mornings started with birdsong instead of alarm clocks. My evenings ended with the crackle of firewood instead of car horns. I wasn't rich, I wasn't flashy, and I sure wasn't trying to impress anyone. My cabin wasn't just a building. It was a piece of my soul. I built most of it with my own two hands. Fixing boards, sealing leaks, cutting wood. Every nail hammered into that cabin had a story. Every scratch on the floor told a tale of hard work and simple living. That morning, I was sitting on the porch, sipping coffee from a chipped mug my father once used. The air smelled of pine and wet earth. A deer had just trotted past the clearing, calm as if it belonged here just as much as I did. For a moment, I thought, this is what freedom feels like. But freedom has enemies. And that day, trouble found me. From the distance, I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. At first, I thought it was a delivery truck, or maybe a neighbor coming by. Out here, visitors are rare, but not impossible. Still, something about the steady, slow approach made me uneasy. When the vehicle finally appeared, my stomach dropped. It wasn't a pickup. It wasn't a delivery van. It was a black SUV, shiny, tinted windows, the kind of car that didn't belong in these woods. The SUV stopped right at the edge of my clearing. The engine cut, and the forest fell silent, like even the birds sensed danger. Then the doors opened. 3 men stepped out. They were dressed in stiff suits, the kind city lawyers wear when they go to court. Clipboard in one hand, sunglasses on. Their expressions told me everything. They weren't here to chat. They were here with business. I stayed seated for a moment, coffee mug in my hand, pretending not to care. But inside, my mind was racing. Who were they? What did they want in the middle of my forest? One of them, tall and lean, walked straight up the path toward my cabin. His polished shoes crunched against the gravel, a sound so out of place it made me grit my teeth. He didn't smile, didn't greet me. He just knocked hard on my wooden door. 3 sharp bangs. Bam, bam, bam. I set my coffee down slowly. Something in me already knew this wasn't good. Sir, the man said, his voice cold and rehearsed, we're from a homeowners association. This property falls under our jurisdiction now, and you are in violation of several community guidelines. For a second, I just stared at him. My mind went blank, then filled with questions all at once. Homeowners association? Out here? In the middle of my forest? What kind of nonsense was this? I cleared my throat. I think you're mistaken. This land is mine. It's been mine for years. There's no community here, just me and the trees. The man smirked, like he'd heard that excuse before. He tapped his clipboard with a pen and said, Sir, our records clearly state this land has been incorporated into the jurisdiction of the Pine Valley HOA. That means your property must follow community guidelines. We're here to inspect compliance. The other 2 agents joined him, standing behind like backup. One of them started scanning my cabin with his eyes, scribbling notes. The third snapped a picture of my firewood pile, like it was evidence in a crime scene. I felt a wave of heat rise in my chest. Guidelines? Compliance? HOA? This wasn't just a visit. This was a warning. I leaned against the porch railing, crossing my arms. And what happens? I asked slowly. If I don't play along with your guidelines? The tall man's smirk widened. Then, sir, you'll be fined. And if fines aren't paid, the HOA reserves the right to place liens against your property. Eventually, foreclosure can occur. It's all standard procedure. He said it like he was reading from a script, like he'd said these words 1,000 times to people who eventually gave up. But I wasn't like those people. I wasn't moving. I wasn't bending. And I sure as hell wasn't letting some HOA I never signed up for try to take the one place on earth where I felt free. Still, in that moment, I didn't lash out. I didn't raise my voice. I just gave him a cold, steady look, hiding the storm brewing inside me. Because deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. That knock on my door wasn't just a knock. It was a declaration of war. 81st, I tried to handle it the calm way. I wasn't the kind of man to start yelling at strangers, especially on my front porch. If these guys thought they were here on official business, I figured maybe I could reason with them. Maybe it was all some kind of paperwork mistake. So I did what any decent host would do, even though they didn't deserve it. I stepped back inside, grabbed a pitcher of water, poured into 3 glasses, and set them on the porch table. Long drive out here, I said, motioning to the glasses. Why don't you sit down and explain what this is all about? But none of them sat. They didn't even touch the water. Instead, the tall one with the clipboard adjusted his tie and started rattling off items like a prosecutor in court. Violation 1, he began, his tone sharp. Your cabin is painted in a non-compliant color scheme. According to HOA guidelines, all properties must maintain a uniform aesthetic. Earth tone browns and natural greens only. This, he gestured toward my cabin's faded red siding, does not meet our approved palette. I blinked. My cabin's color? That was their first problem? I almost laughed, but I kept quiet, letting him continue. Violation 2. The firewood stacked beside your cabin is considered unsightly debris. Community guidelines require all firewood to be stored out of view, either inside a shed or behind a privacy fence. My jaw tightened. That wood pile wasn't just firewood. I'd spent weeks chopping and stacking it, preparing for winter storms. It was survival, not decor. He didn't pause. He flipped the page on his clipboard and kept going. Violation 3. The vehicle parked next to your cabin, an older model truck, qualifies as abandoned property. All vehicles within community limits must be registered, operational, and parked on approved driveways. That one cut deep. That abandoned truck wasn't junk. It was my father's old pickup, the one we used to haul lumber when we built this cabin. It didn't run anymore, but it wasn't an eyesore. It was family history. I clenched my fists, but before I could say a word, he hit me with the real punch. Sir, refusal to comply will result in escalating fines. Should those fines remain unpaid, the Homeowners Association retains a legal authority to initiate foreclosure proceedings on your property. In simple terms, you risk losing this cabin. The words hung in the air like a dark cloud. Foreclosure. For a second, the forest around me seemed to go quiet. No birds, no wind, just those cold words echoing in my head. Foreclosure? On land that had been in my family for generations? On a cabin built with sweat, blood, and memories? I shook my head slowly. You're saying if I don't repay my cabin, hide my firewood, and move my father's truck, you'll take my home? The man with the clipboard didn't flinch. That is correct. Failure to comply demonstrates a lack of cooperation with community standards. We encourage you to avoid further conflict by adhering to guidelines as quickly as possible. That was it. The tone, the arrogance, the way he said encourage, as if he was doing me a favor. These men weren't here to help. They weren't here to negotiate. They were here to intimidate me, to scare me into submission. And the worst part? They thought it would work. I leaned forward on the porch railing, looking each of them in the eye. Listen carefully. I said, my voice steady but low. This isn't a community. This is my land. I didn't sign any HOA agreement. I didn't move into your subdivision. I live here in peace, in the forest. And I'm not about to let 3 men with clipboards tell me how to live. For the first time, their confident expressions faltered. The one taking notes stopped scribbling. The one with the camera lowered it. But the tall man, he just smirked like he'd dealt with rebels before. Sir, he said, his voice colder now, denial is a common first reaction. But understand this. Our reach extends beyond your front porch. Refusing us only makes the process more difficult for you. If you don't cooperate, you'll be facing not just fines, but legal action, sheriff's deputies, court orders, eviction notices. You will comply, whether you like it or not. And with that, he tucked his pen into his shirt pocket, snapped the clipboard shut, and gave a small nod. We'll be back, he added. And when we return, I suggest you reconsider your position. I stood there, frozen, watching as all 3 men turned, walked back down the path, and climbed into their black SUV. The engine roared to life. Gravel crunched beneath the tires. And just like that, they were gone. But the echo of their words stayed behind. Fines, foreclosure, deputies, eviction. I could still hear them in my head, over and over like a broken record. I picked up the untouched glasses of water, dumped them onto the dirt, and sat back down in my chair. My coffee had gone cold, but I didn't taste it anyway. My hands shook as I gripped the mug. The birds had returned to their song. The deer wandered past again. To the forest, nothing had changed. But to me, everything had. Because now, I wasn't just a man living in peace. I was a man under threat. And in that moment, as the last trace of the SUV's engine faded into the distance, I felt something shift deep inside me. I realized I wasn't just going to defend my home. I was going to fight for it. After they drove away, I sat on that porch for a long time, staring into the trees. My coffee was cold, my hands still shaking, but my mind was crystal clear. Those men weren't bluffing. They'd be back, and next time they'd come with more muscle. The words they left me with, fines, foreclosure, deputies, kept echoing in my head. It wasn't just about paint colors or firewood anymore. This was about power, about control. They wanted to scare me into giving up the one thing that mattered most, my freedom. But fear can do two things. It can break you or it can harden you. And that night, sitting by the fire, I made my choice. This cabin wasn't just four walls and a roof. It was my history. My father's old truck in the yard, that wasn't abandoned property. It was the same truck we'd driven into these woods when I was just a boy. The firewood pile they mocked, that was survival. The promise of warmth in the dead of winter. Even the faded red paint on the cabin carried stories. Each brushstroke a memory of hard work and sweat. How could I let some strangers erase all of that with a clipboard and a rule book? No, that was the line. And I wasn't crossing it. I went to corner the cabin where my father's old shotgun rested in a wooden cabinet. It had been years since I'd touched it, but the metal still gleamed under the lamplight. I ran my fingers across the barrel, remembering my father's words. This isn't just a weapon, son. It's a reminder. A reminder that some things are worth protecting, no matter the cost. I cleaned it carefully, checked the shells, and laid it across my lap. I wasn't planning to use it, not unless they forced my hand. But I wanted it ready, because I knew deep down, the next time those men came, they wouldn't just knock. They'd push harder. That night, sleep didn't come easy. Every creak of the wood, every howl of the wind, sounded like engines approaching. I kept the shotgun within arm's reach, my eyes fixed on a window. As the firelight flickered, I thought about the sheriff. Would he side with me or with them? Could the law even protect me from an HOA that seemed to think they had unlimited power? I didn't know. What I did know was this. I wasn't alone. My father's lessons, this land, this cabin, they were all standing with me. And if those agents thought I would just roll over, they were about to learn a hard truth. By dawn, my decision was sealed. I stepped out onto the porch. The morning air crisp, the forest alive with sound. I looked at my cabin. Faded paint, stacked wood, old truck, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Defiance. This wasn't just property. This was my line in the sand. So when those agents came back, and I knew they would, I was ready. Not just with a shotgun, but with something stronger. With resolve. They wanted to intimidate me. They wanted to take my freedom. But they didn't realize they'd just woken a man who had nothing left to lose. And a man with nothing left to lose is the hardest kind to break. The next day passed slowly, almost too quietly. I went about my chores, chopping wood, fixing a loose shutter, feeding the chickens. But my ears were tuned for one sound, engines on gravel. By late afternoon, the forest gave me my answer. First, a low hum. Then, the unmistakable growl of engines growing louder, closer. I set down my axe and wiped the sweat from my brow. My chest tightened. They were back. Through the trees, I saw them. Not one SUV this time. Two, both black, both shining like predators in the sunlight. They pulled up side by side, dust swirling around them and my clearing once again felt invaded. 5 men climbed out this time. Not 3, 5. And every one of them carried the same smug expression, the same sense of entitlement, as if the forest belonged to them now. Clipboards in hand. Cameras ready. This wasn't a visit. It was an ambush of paperwork and intimidation. They didn't hesitate. They walked straight past property line, snapping pictures of my cabin, circling the woodpile, pointing at my father's old truck as if they were surveying land they already owned. I stood on the porch, watching. My hands were steady, though my heartbeat was heavy in my chest. Then I made my move. I stepped forward slowly, my father's shotgun held firmly across my chest. Not aimed, not threatening, just there. A clear message. The effect was instant. The forest went dead quiet, as if even nature was holding its breath. The men froze in their tracks. One of them lowered his camera. Another took a cautious step back. The tall man, the same one who had knocked on my door the day before, was the first to speak. His voice cracked just slightly. "Sir, you can't. This is highly inappropriate. You're threatening officials of a registered homeowners association. That's a crime." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't move the barrel. I just looked him dead in the eyes and spoke slowly, letting every word sink in. "This," I said, tapping the shotgun lightly, "isn't a threat. It's a reminder. A reminder that you're standing on my land. This cabin, this clearing, this forest, it's mine. You're trespassing. And unless you want to explain yourselves to the sheriff, I suggest you leave. Now." For the first time, I saw a real fear flash across their faces. The one with the camera muttered something about calling their lawyer. Another whispered, "We should go." But the tall man wasn't ready to back down. He straightened his shoulders, trying to act calm, though I could see the sweat forming on his forehead. "You don't understand," he said, his voice trembling. "The HOA has authority. We will take this property. If you refuse to comply, you can't stop the process." I took a slow step forward, the wooden porch creaking beneath my boots. My voice stayed low, calm, and steady. "You're wrong," I told him, "because the sheriff already knows about you. I reported your little visit yesterday, and he confirmed what I already knew. This land isn't under your jurisdiction. You're not officials. You're trespassers with clipboards. And if you don't leave right now, it'll be his deputies you'll be answering to." That hit them hard. The group exchanged quick looks. Their confidence cracked like glass. They weren't expecting me to be prepared. They weren't expecting me to stand my ground. Finally, the tall man dropped his bluff. His shoulders sagged. "This isn't over," he muttered, retreating a step. We'll be back." But I could tell he didn't believe his own words. They backed away slowly, then faster, until they were practically jogging toward their SUVs. The doors slammed shut, engines roared, and within seconds, they were tearing down the gravel road, a cloud of dust chasing them like shame. I stood there on the porch, shotgun still in my hands, watching until they disappeared through the trees. Only then did I lower it, resting it against the railing. The forest exhaled again. Birds chirped. The wind returned. Life went on, but I knew something had changed forever. That day, I drew my line in the sand, and they realized I wasn't a man they could push around. And the best part? They never came back. The roar of their engines faded into the distance, leaving behind only dust and silence. For a long moment, I stood on the porch, gripping the shotgun, staring down the empty trail. My chest rose and fell with deep breaths, my pulse still racing. They were gone. But the fight, the real fight, wasn't over. I knew men like that, the type who thrived on intimidation, who believed their rules and paperwork gave them power over everyone. They weren't used to being challenged, and they certainly weren't used to losing. A part of me expected them to return with more SUVs, more men, maybe even law enforcement. So I did the only thing a man in my position could do. I prepared. That evening, I drove into town and paid a visit to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Daniels was a grizzled old lawman, the kind of man who didn't waste words and didn't like nonsense. He'd known my family for years. When I explained what happened, he leaned back in his chair, rubbed his chin, and let out a slow whistle. "They told you what?" he asked, narrowing his eyes. Foreclosure, I said, my jaw tight. Told me my cabin violated some color scheme. Said my firewood was unsightly. Even called my father's truck abandoned property. And when I pushed back, they threatened legal action. Sheriff, they're saying my land falls under their HOA now. The sheriff leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. His voice dropped low. Son, let me be clear. An HOA only has authority over properties inside their officially registered community. Your cabin? It's outside their boundary. They don't own this forest, and they sure as hell don't own you. Relief washed over me, but anger followed right behind it. So, they're just trying to scare me? The sheriff nodded. That's all it is. They want you rattled enough to fold. Probably thought they could slap some paperwork on your door, and you'd hand over the keys. But they picked the wrong man. Next time they show up, you call me directly. I'll handle it. For the first time since those men arrived, I felt the weight lift off my shoulders. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining the threat. They really were trying to scam me out of my land. But now I had backup. When I returned to the cabin that night, the forest felt different. Safer. Stronger. The moonlight spilled across the clearing, shining on the old truck, the stacked wood, the faded red paint of the cabin. All the things they had called violations were more than objects. They were pieces of my life, pieces of my story. And those pieces weren't going anywhere. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. And you know what? The SUVs never came back. No clipboards. No cameras. No threats. It was almost like they'd vanished into thin air, realizing they couldn't win this fight. Maybe the sheriff had sent them a warning. Maybe they just didn't have the stomach for another confrontation. Whatever the reason, their absence was the proof I needed. Standing my ground had worked. Every morning since then, I've stepped out onto my porch with that same chipped mug of coffee in hand, breathing in the crisp air of the forest. The birds still sing. The deer still wander. And my cabin still stands, untouched, unclaimed, free. Sometimes I think back to that first knock on my door. The arrogance in their voices. The smug look in their eyes. The way they thought a few lines of community guidelines could tear me away from my home. They underestimated me. They underestimated what it means to fight for something that's truly yours. Because here's the truth. An HOA might control sidewalks, lawns, or mailboxes in the city. But out here in the wild, they don't control a damn thing. What they failed to understand was simple. This cabin isn't just property. It's freedom. And freedom doesn't bow to rules written on paper by people in suits. So if you ever find yourself face to face with an HOA trying to bully you, remember this. You have rights. They thrive on fear, but when you stand firm, they scatter like the cowards they are. That knock on my door was meant to break me. Instead, it built me stronger. And today, I still wake up in my cabin, firewood stacked, truck parked proudly out front, shotgun locked away where it belongs. Everything exactly how I want it. Because when the HOA tried to take my life apart, I didn't bend. I didn't break. I stood my ground. And that's why I'm still here.